Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled to be here again for the weekly connection with Steve Gielda. And as you're coming in today, we want to give you a chance to get familiar with the Zoom platform. And so as you're coming in, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. It's the weekly connection. We are back together again to learn and grow during the crazy times that our world is facing. So Steve, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your webinar today.
I'm thrilled to have you, and I'm really looking forward to diving into our conversation together. But before we do that, I want to make sure that everyone who's attending live has a chance to give a shout out in the chat. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to know where you're calling in from today, and we would also love to know what you are grateful for today. So if you could take a quick moment to let us know that in the chat. I'll also let you know that we are recording today's session, and it will be available later on our YouTube channel. We have a special playlist just for the Daily Connection Weekly Connection webinar. So welcome, Denise in Cincinnati. I am glad to hear that you are grateful for kind people. Kind people are the best kind of people. So Steve, would you like to share with us what you're grateful for today?
I think one of the things I'm grateful for today is that today is a Tuesday, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we get the pleasure of having our little grandson come over and spend the day with us. So he'll be 2 years old coming up here in August. And so if you hear any squealing in the background, it's because my wife is babysitting today. And so I'm grateful that today's Tuesday and we get the little guy over at our house.
How wonderful is that? I love it.
Yeah.
Denise says she's also grateful for her grandkids. So for those of you who are just coming in, we would love to hear what you're grateful for. My friend Jane is here in Michigan, and she says she's grateful for the Daily Connection continuing for a few weeks yet. And Kristen is here in Columbia, Missouri. She's grateful for individuals looking for ways to improve the world even when it's hard. And Kristen, thank you for saying that. Just a quick note, I mentioned to Steve before this call that I had wondered if we should scramble and get a new guest in light of all that's going on in our country. And we will look in the future to feature people of color and have some talks about the ways that we can be more open and inclusive. But we weren't able to pull that together for today. So I'm thrilled that we can continue to learn on the various topics that we had outlined, and just know that our team is aware of and looking for opportunities to invite some different people and learn some new perspectives through this broadcast. So one of the things I'm grateful for is that even in this time of COVID, my team and I have been doing some training, and Tuesday is our training day. So we have training later this afternoon that I'm looking forward to connecting with the team about. So we want to dive into today's topic. And before I do that, I want to let all of you know a bit more about Steve Gielda. My team and I have been working with Steve and his organization for a while, and we're so thrilled to do that. So Steve is the president and co-founder of Ignite Selling, Inc., which is a global sales training, simulation, and consulting organization dedicated to partnering with customers to implement highly customized performance change projects for building world-class sales teams. Wow, that's a really long sentence. And we're going to hear from Steve a bit later about the work that he and Ignite Selling do in the world. But I'll also let you know that Steve is a published author. He wrote a book, co-authored a book called Premeditated Selling, and he was also a supporting author on a book called The Art of Modern Day Sales Management. And if you go to Ignite Selling's website later, you'll see that there are lots of articles that he and his team have written about sales topics, sales effectiveness, coaching, and product launches. So, and I know, Steve, that you've been doing a lot of learning through this COVID crisis, talking to customers, talking to sales leaders. So I'm wondering, what are you seeing in the sales training industry as a result of the COVID crisis?
Becky, there's been some clear changes taking place in the training world because of this pandemic. Obviously, one of the biggest things is the fact that if you were focused in classroom training where people used to get together face to face, those days are, for at least for the interim period, are pretty much non-existent. And so people have had to shift to some creative ways to start training online. And, at the same time, trying to manage Zoom fatigue as people are always kind of connecting right now through video. How do you also now put people into a virtual classroom for training? So there's been a significant shift from a training standpoint of how do I continue to provide education to my sales teams or to my employees in a virtual way. And I think one of the interesting dynamics from a sales training standpoint is while salespeople are kind of sheltered in place, as they were, say, in the middle of March, most of April, we started kind of seeing people kind of come out maybe a little bit more into May. The question was, where do we spend our time? What are we going to provide our sales team today from an education standpoint? And the CROs, chief revenue officers, chief sales officers, VPs that we were talking to were somewhat in conflict with those people that were in charge of sales training, because people in charge of sales training wanted to kind of go back to some of the roots of their product training, and competitive analysis, and those types of things, where the sales leader simply said, I need to help my sales team sell more. So I need you to help them drive revenue. Let's not be passive and give them education on products. Not that it's not important, but give them some skills that they can help us drive revenue in the midst of this pandemic. So there was this somewhat of a differences of opinion about where should we be spending our time online educating salespeople. So that's been one of the biggest interesting factors to watch.
So let me make sure I'm hearing this and understanding it. There's a pull between, do we train our salespeople on the products that they're looking to sell so they have a depth of knowledge, or do we give them just-in-time help to drive revenue at a time when revenue is needed because there's so much uncertainty?
You're exactly right.
So which of those do you think is more effective? Sorry, I'm going off script.
No, I think that's a great question. I think that when you sit back and you look at the situation that we're in, where companies are having to furlough people and laying people off and cutting back expenses, and revenues are uncertain for many organizations, I think that you really do have to find ways to help organizations, help your sales team, your revenue producers, find ways to produce revenues today. Because producing revenue today is very different than it was, say, in January and February or last year. I mean, the client interactions are different. Our clients' budgets are different. Our clients' decision criteria are different. Influencers could be different. Your influencers may no longer be around. So helping salespeople manage this new environment that they're in today, I think is a really critical skill factor that many companies need help with.
Yeah, I would think so. So what possibilities might exist for organizations to support their sales teams that they're not considering?
Yeah, that's a great question, Becky. One of the things that we're really encouraging our clients to do is to help their sales teams find ways to maintain or even maybe accelerate the pipeline opportunities. So if you think about anybody that's in sales, they have a pipeline. Anybody who's in business, they understand what a pipeline or a funnel is. And prior to coming into this pandemic, we had opportunities in this funnel or in this pipeline. Some were early, middle, or late. And then all of a sudden, the world changed. And in the midst of that change, things got stuck. Things froze for a moment in the pipeline process. So what we're really encouraging people to think about is, what do I need to do to re-engage and kickstart the momentum of those opportunities in their pipeline right now? Because if you elect to do nothing and you elect to kind of pick up where you left off, you're going to find out that that opportunity in your pipeline has changed dramatically, because the proposal that you put forth may no longer be funded. They may no longer have a budget for it. The criteria that they were using to compare company A to company B could be very different because of how this pandemic has changed how they're doing business. So what we're really encouraging salespeople and sales leaders to do is to go back into that pipeline and start challenging some assumptions, or asking yourself some challenging questions about the realities about where those opportunities really lie, and what do we need to do to jumpstart or to continue the momentum of those opportunities so that we don't lose that revenue, in the next month or the next few weeks or the next year.
Sure. So Denise has a question here. She says, helping people to drive revenue, does that mean to provide different ways for them to remain in contact or be relational with their clients?
Potentially. I think Denise is asking a great question. I think, Denise, when you sit back and you think about what does that really mean to drive revenue, it may mean all of those things you mentioned. It may very well be that we have to engage with different people now, or we have to engage with the same people about something different. And when we're talking about the topic of re-engaging with individuals, one of the things that we're really talking to salespeople about right now, and you can see it on some of the other things that we're putting out there, is you must understand, kind of from an empathetic standpoint, where are they in the midst of this? Where are they, they meaning your customer? Do they have somebody who's being impacted by this pandemic? Is their spouse now at home, no longer employed anymore? I think that these things that we have to really find out when we're re-engaging with these people is to touch base in a very compassionate way, not in a false way, but really show some compassion, saying, hey, how's this pandemic impacting you? How's this pandemic impacting your job? How is this pandemic impacting your company? Or how is this pandemic impacting your clients? We really need to be able to understand that at a whole new level. So thank
Well,
you.
it seems, yeah, and it seems to me like it's maybe different for every industry. So my brother happens to be a corporate vice president with an industrial fabrics company. And when I spoke to him early on in the pandemic, because he does have a sales background, what I was hearing is, wow, our automotive business is in real trouble because, car manufacturers aren't building cars, right? So they can't sell to car manufacturers. But he said, guess what? We discovered this new line of business that we're pouring into around medical fabrics. And I think the losses that they're seeing in other parts of their business are being completely made up in these new areas that they're exploring. So this adaptability, or, really understanding there may be some customers of ours who are doing just fine or even thriving in the pandemic because of the disruptions.
Well, I love that word adaptability. I think that those to whom are thriving, I would even say those to whom are surviving, are able to survive or thrive because of their ability to adapt. We started looking at our customer base, and we work in several different industries, several different markets, verticals. But when we sit back and we look at our healthcare marketplace, you have those clients to whom are supporting the pandemic, and those clients to whom might have an elective procedure product that supports elective procedures, and all those elective procedures were put on the shelf. They're simply that they don't want anybody in the hospital right now for an elective procedure. But the companies that are really thriving in either one of those camps are the ones to whom have been able to adapt. If you're surviving the pandemic, if you're supporting the pandemic, you're able to survive because you were able to make a pivot and to be able to support your clients in the way that they need to be supported right now. Products in hand, just-in-time inventory, whatever they needed right now. I don't care if it's beds or wipes or whatever it is that you need. If you're on the other side of the equation and you're selling a surgical product for an elective procedure, well, the question now becomes is, what do? You have sales representatives who can't go meet with doctors or physicians. Physicians' offices are closing. Everything they're doing is through telemedicine. So what do you do? And I think we're seeing those types of clients make the shift to simply say, let us explore a little bit about how we can help you survive in this post-pandemic market. What are you going to do to bring your patients back into your practice? What are you going to do to communicate back to your patients about when elective procedures will be available? So those companies have been able to really adapt, I think, are doing much better in this pandemic than probably they would have predicted.
So let's talk a little bit about what skills might matter the most for sales professionals or sales trainers in this post-pandemic down economy period that we're facing. So you mentioned adaptability. What other skills matter most right now?
Yeah, I think that skill that probably matters more than anything else is the ability to think strategically. I think that those to whom we are seeing succeed in this marketplace today are those to whom have been able to hit the pause button for a moment, step back, think strategically about what's going on with this particular opportunity or this particular account, then put together a strategy in place that's going to help them drive that momentum. Let me give you a
Mm.
quick example, Becky.
Sure.
Working with a particular client, and they are selling a large piece of capital equipment, and the budgets for this type of particular capital equipment have been totally dried up. All of the monies for their customers is just no longer available. And so they're simply saying, we're not going to hit our numbers before the end of the year because the budgets for the products that we're selling have all been reallocated to cover maybe payroll, cover overhead, whatever the case may be, but they no longer have funds to buy our client's particular capital piece of equipment. And you're talking about a piece of equipment that's over $150,000. And they're simply saying, I know we had money spent for that, we had money budgeted for that, but we can't do it anymore. Those sales representatives who are in that type of industry, what they're simply doing is they're hitting the pause button, they're taking a step back, and they're now thinking strategically about what is it that I can do to find a way to help my clients understand the value of making that $150,000 investment, even though they believe they don't have the budget to do it.
Mm.
And so what they're doing is they're re-engaging. And they're re-engaging in a way by simply asking them, so are the same influencers that were involved pre-pandemic the same influencers that are involved now? Don't make that assumption. That's a dangerous assumption. Is the decision criteria that the customer was using to compare us against somebody else in terms of making this decision, is it still the same? Maybe you're going to find budget's going to be more important as opposed to other things. But what is that decision criteria? Don't make that assumption. And what about the sense of urgency or consensus around the problem? So we're finding the best of the best today are challenging their assumptions. They're stopping and they're thinking and they're challenging their assumptions about what they believe they knew to be true. And they're saying, is this still true? So those are the folks who I think are winning.
So adaptability, strategic thinking, and challenging assumptions.
I think
Those are powerful.
it's a good start, isn't it?
Hmm. So for those of you who are still with us, if you can think of any other qualities that you think are going to matter most post-pandemic. I know here in Michigan, we got news yesterday that some things are going to start to open up sooner than we expected. We were at a stay-at-home order until June 14th, and that's been released, I think, as of yesterday, and some things are going to start to open up as soon as June 8th, which is, I think it's hopeful, right, to finally see the end of what has seemed like a really long road. So I'm curious what signs you're looking for in terms of your industry. Steve, how will you know when things are starting to improve?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, what it is from our clients in the training, those people who buy sales training, we are seeing things already start to turn around and improve because our clients have recognized that there are ways to provide sales education, ways to help salespeople drive revenue in the midst of this pandemic using virtual technologies. Okay. And what we're starting to see is people opening up the door and saying, tell me about this. Most of our clients, most of our business up until this pandemic was done in face-to-face training. Salespeople would come into a classroom or some kind of a hotel room, and we would launch some kind of a simulation or some kind of interactive learning program. And when are those days coming back? We don't really know. But the sites that we're seeing that we're starting to see the turn is that clients are saying, I recognize that I need to improve the performance of my sales team. I can't wait for this time to come back where we're going to get together face to face. So I need to start finding other ways. And when they get the opportunity to kind of see the type of technology that we provide, it's still a virtual classroom. You're still putting people in small groups. They're still debating. It's still competitive. They're still challenging each other. They're still getting heated over discussions about should I go left or should I go right. So they're still able to provide value to their sales teams through these smaller micro-bite sessions where you can give people some skill sets in a very short 90-minute, 2-hour session that really adds immediate value right now. So we're starting to see the turnaround on that.
Yeah, that's powerful. So, is there more about that that you can share with us about what that experience is like in a virtual setting compared to the large in-person gatherings that you used to support clients with? So, it
Sure.
sounds like smaller groups of people, maybe more intimate interaction.
Yeah, I think that any kind of training, when it's led through kind of a peer-to-peer environment, is going to be more powerful than it would be by having that so-called sage on the stage that simply says, "Let me tell you what you need to start doing and tell you what you need to stop doing." I just don't think that kind of training still works anymore. I think, and for any kind of training, frankly, I think the more that you can provide a peer-to-peer learning environment, you're going to have greater results, greater retention, greater adoption. So when we were providing training in the classroom, we always created an environment around a table group that that was led at the table group. We don't believe that PowerPoint people learn through PowerPoint. It's a great way to share knowledge, but it's not a great way necessarily to teach skills. And so we did away with PowerPoint about 6 years ago, and all of our training has always been done in small groups. So our trick is how do we take this same type of environment and put it into an online virtual setting? And
Mhm.
so we worked really hard. I was grateful that my business partner, Kevin, was able to find and he searched around for a lot of different technologies. And frankly, we landed on Adobe Connect. I know we're on a Zoom platform and they have a Zoom a virtual kind of classroom environment as well. But we had to find a peer-to-peer learning environment that would allow people to still work on a map. We always had a game board. And so how do we take this game board that's on a table and how do you put it into a virtual environment? And we were very successful in making that happen. So 90% of all the stuff we did around a small table group in a classroom, we're doing now with 4 or 5 people in separate different breakout rooms. And they can see each other, they can talk to each other, and they can still flip over cards and they can still draw arrows on a learning map and they can still move stuff around because peer-to-peer learning is really what people are driving for. Particularly right now, they want to talk about stuff because everybody's got different experiences about what they're seeing.
Well, and I think also with many of us being isolated and working at home alone, any opportunity to connect with each other will invigorate us, at least for those among us who are extroverts like me.
Like
So,
most
you know,
salespeople.
that's right, like most salespeople, that's true. So Denise is commenting here that peer-to-peer learning environment and adapt to virtual is amazing. Good job.
Oh, thank you, Denise.
Yeah, and you know, I'm intrigued by that. You know, I am a pretty diehard Zoom user, but the idea of being able to actually draw on a map together or turn over cards in a virtual environment sounds amazing.
Yeah,
So
thank
I'm
you.
curious, and this question is not on our list, but I'm curious, Steve, do you think that many companies will continue to pursue virtual training even after travel is, you know, more safe and comfortable for folks?
That's the question that we're even asking ourselves is how much training will remain in a virtual environment compared to going back to a classroom environment. And I'm grateful I belong to an association where I have a lot of peers that are in all different types of training, not just sales training. They're in fact, some of these people are some of your clients. As a matter of fact, it's how you and I met was through this ISA connection group. And we're asking ourselves that same question. And I think what you're going to find out is will we ever go back to having as much classroom training as we did in 2019 and 2018 and prior to this pandemic? Will we ever go back to that? Personally, I don't believe we ever will. I think that organizations are going to recognize that I can save on the T&E, the travel and entertainment budget. I can invest into technology and I can still have a very impactful way to learn. Now, that doesn't mean that face-to-face training will never come back because there's still tremendous value in pulling particularly these extroverted salespeople into a room together, all right? That's value in itself because they get to share war stories. They get to kind of support each other, kind of celebrate successes and things that I think a sales environment really needs. But I do believe that you're going to see less face-to-face training as a result of this transition in the marketplace than you did in years past. I think people are going to start to recognize that I can save the money on the budget. I can put people into a virtual peer-to-peer learning environment and still have the same impact.
Well, I guess we will see what comes of that, but I think your instincts are on target, especially as we're hearing news about many organizations who may not even return to working in an office together, but will remain working remotely for some time. So we've touched on this a bit, but before we wrap up this half hour together, Steve, I would love to hear from you what makes Ignite Selling different from most other sales training companies. You know, you've given us a glimpse, particularly as you've described the virtual learning opportunities, but in general, what makes Ignite Selling's approach different?
And I appreciate you asking that question. I think the biggest difference between our company and other companies is probably three things. Number one, because we are a very small, successful company, we don't have the marketing budgets of some of our biggest competitors. But what we do is we invest our time in measuring the impact. So number one is that we have the quantitative data that simply talks about the economic and the financial impact we can have on a sales team. And so we have data and numbers and to really back up what our claims are, whether it means you want to help launch a new product, you want to help do team selling greater, you want to particularly increase revenue about a particular marketplace, whatever it might be. We have the metrics that simply say we can move the needle in these areas. That's number one, is that I always like to say evidence defeats doubt. So we have the evidence to kind of back that up. Number two is the fact that, you heard me talk a little bit about it, is the fact that we don't believe that salespeople learn through PowerPoint. So whether it's going to be in a classroom environment or it's going to a face-to-face classroom environment or a virtual classroom environment, we believe that people learn by doing. So the more the realistic environment you can put your people into, put them in a peer-to-peer learning environment where you encourage people to measure, to communicate back and forth, you're going to have a greater return. And I think the third thing, Becky, that really kind of helps the work that we do really differentiate ourselves is that we leverage technology and coaching where necessary. We recognize that managers play a critical role in the success of any kind of critical initiative inside a sales organization, whether it means driving a particular market, holding particular margins, or changing behaviors of their sales team. So therefore, we provide coaching of the coach. We help the managers do a better job of coaching their salespeople so that those metrics can be met. Because we know that if we simply leave it up to the sales organization themselves, it's not going to get done to the degree that we hope or our clients hope. So therefore, we want to help hold those managers accountable for achieving the outcomes that, frankly, our clients are holding us accountable to achieve. So it's those three things: measurable differences, we believe in peer-to-peer learning in a real environment, and three, we believe in holding managers accountable.
So coaching the coaches.
Yeah.
That is really powerful. So I know we have a number of resources that we're going to put in the chat if you'd like to learn more from Steve and from Ignite Selling. There is a influencer snapshot e-learning module that's free for the next 90 days. So, even if you're not a salesperson or in a sales organization, if you know some folks who might be, or if you're willing to share through your social channels, that free e-learning module is a powerful resource, and we encourage you to check it out. You can also find out more about Ignite Selling by visiting their website and also connecting on LinkedIn. So Kelly has put all of those links in the chat. So Steve, I did not tell you when we started that typically what I do at this point of the call is I kick it back to you for any kind of parting advice or wisdom for our group. And then I end these calls fairly abruptly because we're videotaping them and all of that. So this is the point at which I forgot to tell you, but now I'm telling you. So it's your chance to share some parting inspiration before we close out that time together.
You know what? Thanks for the shock. That's a sudden question on that one. But I don't think it's really that hard to come up with a couple of pieces of advice or words of, encouragement at this stage in the game. We are facing some very, very difficult times in our world today, and as there's protesting taking place all over the city, and there's some very ugly parts of that's taking place right now. I think that now more than ever, due to the stress from the pandemic, now due to the stress of what's happening in our major cities today, I think that it's time for us to kind of show some compassion. It's time for us to look to one another and show some compassion for the different viewpoints the different, you may not all agree, but one thing we can agree upon is that be kind to one another matters. So take time, be kind, show some compassion, and we will get through this. We will get through this difficult time. But if we're going to be point counterpoint and showing that your opinion matters and I can scream louder than you, it's never going to end. So take some time, show some compassion, take a breath, be kind to one another. Probably the best advice I'd have right now.
Thanks so much, Steve. I'm glad we had this chance to connect. Take care, everyone. We'll be
Thank
back
you.
next week. I cannot remember who our guest is next week. Let me look it up really quickly. Um, Our guest next week is Scott Mouts, and he's going to be talking about effective leadership from a distance. He's a great guy. I think you'll like him. And we'll be back next Tuesday, 3 more weeks with you on the weekly connection before we wrap for the summer. So take good care, Steve.
Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.